Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Sports Pundit. And joining me today is a very special guest, all the way from Sydney. He's a cricket broadcaster. He is a cricket podcaster as well, who has a podcast channel as well, with the name Dennett on Cricket Podcast. And first things first, thanks a lot, Paul, for joining me for this conversation today. And I know it's a bit difficult scheduling the whole thing with the time difference between Mumbai and Sydney, but thank you. And I hope you're doing really well and you enjoyed the Champions Trophy. I know Australia did not lift the trophy, but you got to witness India lifting the trophy late at night at 4 a.m. But we'll get to the conversation right away. And first things first, I know the Champions Trophy was happening after a very long period. It was an 8-year gap, and I know. I mean, Australia obviously were not treating it as a major trophy because a lot of their players were not a part of the Champions Trophy. But even the games, for that matter, there were a very handful of matches that actually went down till the wire. We had the Australia England game, we had the Afghanistan England game, but apart from that, there were a lot of matches that were just one sided, for that matter. But as a viewer, how did you enjoy? How was your experience viewing this Champions Trophy 2025?
Hey Vignesh, thanks for having me on. Yeah, I mean it was. I think Australia took it seriously. It's just that they had the injuries that occurred in a bit of a glut. I suppose you could say that Marcus Stoinis and Mitchell Starc probably would have played if it had been a World Cup. So maybe there's something to it there. But I think the biggest issue was always going to be from an Australian point of view, regardless of whether Australia got eliminated in the group stage or went on and won the whole thing. That, as you said, in the middle of the night, we're kind of used to that. That's not so bad. But the fact that it was unfortunately a couple of years ago, a minor streaming service bought the rights to all World Cup cricket and all World ICC events in Australia, and so we're used to, prior to that, having it all on our big free-to-air network. So if you go back to the 2023 World Cup, it was on our biggest television station, and the viewing audience by Australian standards, given we haven't got that many people, was huge. And it was the talk of the town. Everyone was talking about the World Cup. Unfortunately, this one, even if Australia had won it, no one was going to be talking about it. It also coincided with the beginning of our football seasons here. So we've got rugby league in half the country, Australian rules football in the other half of the country. They are our two big sports, along with cricket. But cricket tends to dominate kind of November, December, January. And once you get into February, the football codes are ready to start again, and people's interest very quickly switches. So all that being said, it was never going to be that big in Australia. And I think the reality is one-day cricket in Australia has lost a lot of its popularity as well. It's kind of we've become very much either Test or T20, one-day cricket kind of in the middle. And the Champions Trophy, a weird sort of tournament that's been cancelled and renovated about 3 different times. So all that being said, I was watching the games as much as I could, but I got the sense that there was very, very few other people in the country watching them. That's including the Australia game where Australia beat England. So it's not to say that we were just being bad sports and saying, oh, well, given Australia's not doing so well, we're not interested. That's not true at all. Even when Australia beat England, the next day you would barely have known that the game had been on. So that was always going to be the case. Cricket is a big sport here, but for those reasons, the Champions Trophy in Australia was never going to be very much followed, except by very hardcore cricket fans like me.
Paul, actually, now that you've mentioned the whole thing about ODI cricket losing its relevance, I would actually want to bring this point that ODI cricket, I mean, it's very obvious now that people want to watch more of Test cricket and T20. As you said, in Australia, it's the same here as well. The viewership of ODI cricket is not that as much as it is for the T20 cricket or Test cricket, considering that cricket is the whole and soul of India. So now that you've mentioned about ODI cricket, so we have a T20 World Cup happening the very next year in India and Sri Lanka. So again, the teams are going to focus a lot more on T20 cricket. Bilateral series are going to be a lot of T20 cricket. So what is the future of ODI cricket? Because even when bilateral ODI series happens, there are a very few audience who actually turn up to the games and actually are viewing the matches, live streaming the games, because it is just losing its relevance. I mean, the World Cups, I mean, there's a World Cup happening in 2027. The World Cup is always going to be the biggest event of cricket, but the bilateral series is slowly and steadily losing its relevance. It's more of T20 cricket, and Test cricket is obviously going to stay there because of the fact that there is the WTC, the World Test Championship. But what can be done to increase the relevance of ODI bilateral series, according to you?
I think that they have to be matches that people care about the results of. So Australia played 2 matches against Sri Lanka in the lead up to the Champions Trophy and got beaten in both. And I watched both, and it just didn't worry me. I wanted Australia to win, but it didn't bother me at all that Australia lost because it was just another in the whole merry-go-round of bilateral series. As soon as the Champions Trophy began, I really wanted Australia to win, and I thoroughly enjoyed the game against England. I enjoyed the game against Afghanistan until it got raid off, and even though Australia lost, I enjoyed the game against India, and it was great even at 2 a.m, riding every ball and really wanting Australia to do well. I think that with the World Cup, especially being so big, and now we've got the T20 World Cups, the Champions Trophy, give or take, it means that bilateral series, there's just no reason to care about them. And you kind of get the sense that in a year's time, people will have forgotten them. So what I would like to see, personally, I'd like to see 2 things happen. One, I'd like to see one-day cricket given some context. So I would like an equivalent of the World Test Championship for the bilateral series. So Australia's got 4 bilateral series coming up in the next few months. It would be fantastic if they were for points in a white ball. I'd throw the T20s in there as well and make it, every time that you had a bilateral white ball series, it was 3 one-dayers, 3 T20s, 2 points if you win the series, 1 point if it's a draw, have some relegation and promotion, have a final at the end of it all, call it the white ball league. And people would say, oh, well, wait a minute, we've got T20 World Cup every second year. You've got the Champions Trophy, the World Test Championship, the World Cup. They'd say there's going to be too many. And I'd say that's possibly true, but it's better than at the moment having all these bilateral games that just have no meaning and no context, and I think are actually damaging the sport in many ways. So I'd like to see that. And then from an actual rules point of view, I would like to see 50-over cricket reduced to 40 overs. I think that the period in the game where it starts to drag the most for me is around about that period in the 20th over or the 27th over or somewhere where there's often a consolidation phase and that often there's an off-spinner, part-time off-spinner bowling, and the batters are thinking, well, it'd be great if I could smash it everywhere, but if I could only just get 6 singles, I'll be reasonably happy. And the bowler's thinking, I'd love to take a wicket, I'd love to bowl a maiden, but if I couldn't do that, if we only conceded 6 singles, I won't be too disappointed. There's not enough. Both sides are kind of almost happy with the outcome either way. And I would like to see 10 overs shaved off. I'd still keep 10 overs minimum for the maximum for each bowler so we can have more specialist bowlers bowling. And I think that would tighten it up and bring it closer to the bat on ball contest. There's undeniable skill in what manipulating the ball around the field and taking those singles, but I've watched enough of it. I've seen 10 million easy singles taken, and I don't want to see that many more. Cut 10 overs out, and I think then 40 overs, maybe one day cricket could once again try to be the best of both worlds between tests and T20s.
Now that actually we've mentioned about ODIs actually reducing to a 40-over contest, there's a 2027 World Cup happening in South Africa. I mean, it's very difficult, but do you sense this inclusion of 40-over thing? Do you think it could happen by 2027, or is it still a long way to go for ODI cricket to reduce it to 40 overs? We saw it come down from 60 to 50, but is it a reality now that by the time the 2027 World Cup comes, we could see it happening, it reducing even more from 50 to 40 overs as well?
It's possible. I don't think it's likely. I haven't really heard any speculation of it from the sources that matter. And I suppose the biggest downfall of it would be they would have already done a broadcast deal, I would imagine, that is based on 50 overs. And that's the first thing that you'd say. If you're a broadcaster, you'd say, wait a minute, if I get 20 overs less, that's, what's that, 80 minutes of the way that over rates are these days. It's 100 minutes of cricket that I'm missing out on that I can't sell ads in. So they would then go back to the ICC and say, okay, could we please have a 20% discount on the money that we've paid you? So I don't see it happening realistically anytime soon. But maybe beyond that there is some sort of scope for tightening it up. But yeah, I can't see it happening soon.
Well, thanks, Paul. I mean, I want to get back to the champions. I mean, yes, India did lift the Champions Trophy. There was a lot of talk going around regarding the whole India getting that advantage thing. We'll get back to that. But the way India is currently playing the whole white ball thing, they might still not be the best red ball team in the world right now. But when you see the whole white ball spectrum, do you consider this Indian bunch of players the best in the world right now? And also, do you think is it fair enough to compare this Indian white ball team to the likes of the Australian team of the 2000s or the West Indies team of the 70s and the 80s? Because I am seeing a lot of comparison with the way the Indian team has been playing since the last three ICC events. They are on an unbeaten run. The only game which we've actually lost in an ICC event was against you guys in the 2023 World Cup final. So I know Australia, they have a lot of trophies in that 2000 to 2010 wala period, the period which was there. But India might have just have two trophies. But do you think that the Indian white ball team is now on a run to dominate white ball cricket in the next 5 to 6 years?
It's a very good question. I think any white ball games in the subcontinent or in Asia, yes, India's dominance is unquestioned. I mean, look at the spin attack that they had: Chakravarti, Jadeja, Akshar Patel, and Kuldeep Yadav. That's just incredible. There's never been a spinning lineup like that. So I think that if there's to be a white ball tournament in the subcontinent or anywhere in Asia, India would start as very, very strong favourites, and their dominance is very, very high. It'll be interesting, if the T20, if the 50 over World Cup in 2027 in South Africa, if that was next week, I think India would start as favourites, but probably only narrowly over maybe Australia, and potentially South Africa might come up as third favourites, assuming Australia had their best side. So I still think that India outside of Asia are probably the best in the world. But I think that the gap is much closer. If Australia was playing India in a one-dayer at Lord's tomorrow, I would put my money on India, but I'd say it's a 55-45 sort of situation. So are they at the level of the Australian side of around about the turn of the century, or the West Indian side of the 70s and 80s? I don't think quite yet. I would still say that those two sides are the best sides that I've seen. And I think that and I also think that the Australian side of the relatively recent past isn't that far below them on certain surfaces. So and I think there's probably a different way of looking at it as well. That there's this feeling that India, racking up ICC events, and that's undeniable. But maybe I'm a bit older, but I still look at it as the World Cup of 50 over cricket being the preeminent event, and I look at it and say, well. They've won just the one World Cup in the last 40 years. So there's a way to go there. Now, that probably sounds like a biased Australian, but I think that maybe my bias counteracts some of the bias coming out of India at the moment as well. Maybe the truth is somewhere in between.
Yeah, I definitely get your point, because World Cup is the pinnacle of any sport. And if you see actually our performance in the World Cup, we've just won two. And when you compare it to the Australians, they've had six World Cups in the last I don't know how many years. So yes, I mean, when it comes to World Cup, yes, we have not been at our best but uh, see the 2027 World Cup in South Africa, as you said, the spin attack is brilliant. But when it comes to performing outside the subcontinent, outside the Asian conditions, that is going to be a huge task for this Indian team, considering that in Asian conditions they have been in absolute domination. But there's the T20 World Cup happening very next year, and that team is going to be completely different for India. It's not the same bunch of guys who played this tournament. That's a very new bunch of team which our coach Gautam Gambhir wants us to play. He's trying a lot of players. So, do you think that the 2026 T20 World Cup in Sri Lanka and India, do India start as favorites there?
Oh, yeah, massively. I mean, especially given that I presume Boomerang will be back and fit. And I know that there's a question of his workload, but if I'm in India, I'm having him in the T20 World Cup for sure. And yeah, players that are dominating in the IPL, players like Abhishek Sharma and others that are not necessarily household names outside India. I was watching the IPL closely last season, and India probably going into this 2026 World Cup. Not only will they start as favourites, but if India picked an India A side and an India B side, well, the India A side might be close to second favourites, and the India B side would probably cause some upsets as well. So yeah, I think the dominance is huge. And looking ahead to South Africa 2027, it's not to say India are poor outside of Asia, which was once the case. India once were not so good outside of Asia. They're now very, very good, especially with Bumrah. But it's just that they are even better in Asian conditions. I still think they, as I said, if the World Cup was starting tomorrow in South Africa, India would start as favourites for that.
And I want to get to the Australian team. We saw the Australian team not having the pace trio for this Champions Trophy. We had a completely new bunch of players being part of the Australian 11, especially the pace attack. So where do you think? What do you think is the future? Because there's the WTC final happening in June against South Africa, and Australia, in my opinion, are definitely they have an upper edge over South Africa in that final. But speaking about this pace trio, what do you think? They are at the kind of twilight end of their careers as well. So, what is the future of the Australian pace attack according to you?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think there's a little bit left in the tank for those guys, especially Cummins. Hazelwood has started to pick up a few injuries of late, but I wouldn't rule him out either. And it's quite possible that in 2 years' time they will still be there and thereabouts. You've got to throw in Scott Boland as well. He's roughly the same age, but he's a fantastic bowler too. It was an interesting set of bowlers that Australia chose for this the Champions Trophy, because they're not necessarily who you think of when you think of the next cab off the rank. There's a bowler out here by the name of Fergus O'Neill, who in the Sheffield Shield is doing fantastically well, and he's someone that I think should be in the Australian consideration sooner rather than later. There's Jai Richardson and Lance Morris and Xavier Bartlett, to name just a few. So Ben Dwarshuis, Spencer Johnson. I think Nathan Ellis is probably the exception. I think he definitely, even if all Australian bowlers were available, I would have him in contention for our premier white ball side. Dwarshuis is a very handy player, can hit the ball long, and is a decent bowler. Spencer Johnson is an exciting bowler, but if it was up to me, they wouldn't have been in my side. I probably would have been picking someone like Scott Boland, even though he's only got a fairly modest one-day a white ball record. I think he would have been worthy of a go. So it's hard to read too much into their performance, given that in 2 years' time in South Africa, the conditions will be very different. But I personally would be surprised if Dwarshuis is featuring, and probably surprised if Spencer Johnson is featuring, although I will acknowledge with him, at his best, he is superb. He just is a little bit inaccurate at the moment. If he can get control of his accuracy, then he could be a very good bowler for Australia.
Yeah, I mean, all said and done, I still feel like the pace trio which you guys have right now, while when the 2027 World Cup comes, I do see them playing that World Cup, and maybe another India Australia final at Johannesburg this time as well. But now the team I want to talk about, it's a very curious case for them. They won the 2019 World Cup. They won the 2022 T20 World Cup. I mean, there was a time where they were actually holding the ODI World Cup and the T20 World Cup at the same time. They brought a revolution. That's what they call a revolution in ODI white ball cricket. It's a team which you guys like a lot. So, what is currently going wrong with the English cricket team, and what do you think is the future of the England cricket team? Because Josh Butler has stepped down. They haven't named any new captain as of now. There's a huge talk going around. Maybe what if Stokes comes back to the white ball setup and captains them? There's Harry Brooks' name which is going around as well. So, what do you think is the future of the England cricket team right now?
It's very, very interesting because, as you say, it's been well documented that the 2015 World Cup, they were terrible, and they decided to start afresh. And right from the start, with under Owen Morgan and playing attractive, aggressive cricket, they then became the best side in the world and deservedly won the 2019 World Cup. The final could have gone to New Zealand, but I think overall they were the best side around about that time. And then, as you said, they won the next. Well, they won not the next one, but the World Cup after that in T20 cricket. It's been bizarre that they were so poor in 2023 and then so poor here. I think to a point, I would say sometimes, especially in the Champions Trophy, you can have one or two bad matches and it's all over. And I think that they had that game in the World Cup. Was it against New Zealand where maybe they got the wrong end of the dew, and then it just kind of unraveled. I still think if there was going to be a World Cup tomorrow in India, let's say, that I would consider England one of the chances. Although I think that traditionally in the last few years, every world tournament, India, Australia, and England have been the three favourite nations going in, and there's been a bit of a gap to fourth. And the order of those three might swap a little bit, with India more often than not the outright favourite. Maybe England probably would still be now third favourite if they had a World Cup in India starting tomorrow, but they would be only just above. They'd be right in a group there with South Africa and New Zealand probably as next favourites. Funnily enough, there's this expectation that England will always be good at one-day cricket, but they've been pretty terrible at it, with the exception of these last few years. You go back, and I was looking back, that the last time, except for that 2019 World Cup, the last time they won a knockout game in an actual World Cup, I think it was 1992 or something like that. So they haven't been very good. And their biggest problem is that the average kid doesn't play cricket or follow cricket. That there's about 5 to 10% of people in England who love cricket. Beyond that, it doesn't really register. They've been behind a paywall since 2005. And you go around ask a kid in India, do you play cricket? They're probably likely to say yes. Ask a kid in Australia, do you play cricket? Not as much likely to say yes as India, but still probably, or at least they're aware of it, and they'd know the names of Pat Cummins and all the, they'd know cricket. I think you ask an average kid in England, you might well get the answer that cricket doesn't really register with them. And so I think that's their big problem, that longer term, they have to find a way to return the cricket to, the level of popularity that it once had. But swinging back, I still think they're very good side. I think it's good that Josh Butler's no longer going to be their captain. I don't think he was suited for captaincy, a bit in the same way that I don't think ultimately Joe Root was suited for captaincy. So it's certainly going to be interesting. It's going to be fun with McCullum in charge, and it'll be fun either way as an Australian fan. If they keep on failing, that's a bit funny. If they start succeeding again, well, it'll be attractive to watch.
I mean, yes, there's an Ashes this year as well, and it's in your home ground. So I'm expecting Australia to dominate the Ashes as usual, as it has been in the last few years as well. But I think it's time for us to discuss the elephant in the room. There's been a lot of talk about this, India having that undue advantage of playing all their matches at Dubai. Uh, we all know the geopolitical tensions between India and Pakistan, and India not wanting to tour to Pakistan. That's a whole different thing. So ICC had to come up with something, because there cannot be an ICC event happening without India's participation in it. So they because that's because India is the place, because India is the place from where you get your viewership, you get your sponsorship. So there's no way that you can have an ICC tournament and India is not participating in it. So ICC comes up with this thing that you keep all India's matches at Dubai. But yes, I am completely agreeing to the fact that yes, we had an undue advantage. It would be pretty dumb for me to say that no, we did not have an advantage playing all our matches at Dubai. But what, according to you, could ICC do differently? Because having all your matches being played at one venue, I don't think it has ever happened in an ICC event before, that one team has played maybe 5 or 6 games in just one venue, because that's a very big bias for any team. So what do you think ICC could have done in a different way, considering the fact that India will not tour to Pakistan in maybe the near future?
Well, just touching on that one point, you said that in the 2009 Champions Trophy, South Africa played every match at the one venue, which not a lot, but some Indian fans have used as an example of, well, that happened, so this happened, so therefore there's no difference there. And I find that sometimes very frustrating, that some Indian fans are sort of, I think they're so wrapped up in the performance of their own team and so patriotic that any criticism really, really riles them. And, that 2009 example, there were only 2 grounds used in the whole tournament. They were half an hour down the road from each other. And, the difference in conditions that existed between Pakistan and and Dubai just didn't exist. So I think that there's been a few false equivalences thrown around. I agree with you that inevitably India has to be part of these. If the ICC had said, if you don't want to go to Pakistan, you can't play, that would have been a disaster for cricket, because the money would have dropped out of the floor. It would have been a disaster for India as well. If there's a war between the rest of the world and India in terms of cricket, the rest of the world will suffer because financially we'll go bankrupt. But I think if India just had a year-round IPL and they would be fine, it would also rob the game of much of its joy in India, because as much as domestic cricket and franchise tournaments can be great, it's the international game that really does, I think, still is the beating heartbeat of the sport. So, but yeah, India has to be a part of it. I think maybe one of the things they could have done would have been to say, if the matches in Dubai are going to be materially different in character to the pitches that are going to be in Pakistan, let's allow teams who are traveling to Dubai to play have a 16th and 17th member of their squad for Dubai matches only. So after India won the final, and I should say India deserved to win. If India had played every game in Pakistan, I'm sure India still would have won. So they didn't win the tournament because of the advantages they had. They won the tournament because they were the best side. And if I was an Indian fan, I would be frustrated by the fact that the rest of the world is sort of saying, oh, there should be an asterisk next to this event. And I would be saying, I'd be eager for future tournaments not to have that. I want it to be seen to be a level playing field, so that if we are the best side and we win, people can acknowledge that without anything else. So people were saying that if New Zealand had been able to pick a side purely for Dubai conditions, maybe they would have had an extra specialist spinner in their squad and would have been able to play them in the final. But because they had to pick for Pakistan conditions as well, that wasn't possible. So maybe if they'd been allowed to have two extra players to join in, that sort of thing. I think the other big thing was the farcical nature of the semi-final scheduling. And people also say, well, your board signed off on it. The ICC did it, not us. And I kind of think that's missing the point. That however it came about, the fact that both Australia and South Africa had to fly to Dubai, knowing that one of them was then going to fly back, the fact that New Zealand had to play, they traveled 7,000 kilometers in 18 days playing in two Pakistan cities, then they flew to Dubai, then back to Pakistan, then back to Dubai, while India are staying in the same hotel the whole time. That sort of thing, you could find ways to do that differently. Whether it is that India just would have had to play the second semi-final so that Australia and South Africa would have known that they were able to have extra time and not have to make that unnecessary flight. I don't know. You could spend a bit of extra money and say the final's going to be in Colombo, and that way that both sides are coming in fresh to the ground for the first time. A few things like that, I think, could be done to make it different. But I think that a lot of overseas fans would be saying, well, look what India did with the pitches in the 2023 knockout stages. The sort of, ICC inspectors saying that they were unhappy with what India was doing with the venues. The 2024 T20 World Cup, that India knew right from the start that they were going to be having their semi-final was it Guyana, that every game for them was going to be at the same time because of the sort of Indian television audience, whereas other people were playing at all different times. All of those things, there's good reasons. I don't mind that, let's cater for the Indian TV audience. Yes, let's get as many eyeballs in front of the game as possible. But I think it's in India's own interests in the future to say, okay, let's make sure that this doesn't happen again, because if we win, as we might well do naturally, we don't want the rest of the world to have this opportunity to say that there was an asterisk.
I'm actually very glad that you actually mentioned it, that this whole venue advantage thing is taking away from the fact that India is actually the best white ball team, and they were the best team of the tournament. But
Yes.
this thing is taking away from the fact that we won it, and there are not much talks happening about how India won it. It's more about because India got an advantage, they won it because of that. So it's kind of sad as an Indian fan. I don't want to be. I want people to cherish the victories which we have, which is not happening, because people are more about they got an advantage, and that's the only reason why they actually went on to win the tournament, which certainly is not the case. As you mentioned, even if we had played games in Pakistan, I am pretty sure that we would have at least reached the final there as well. So very good of you, Paul, that you actually mentioned this whole point that India is the best team. But yeah, anyways, that's clearly my bias which is speaking right now.
Well, I think
But
that actually most people would think that. Like, I think you ask the average Australian cricket fan, they would say, yeah, India's the best team and they deserve to win. But I think a lot of Indians hearing this would say, oh, you're just, what's the expression you guys use? Cry more. And there's a feeling that because Australia got eliminated, that there's that bitterness. And I honestly don't think that's the case. I think Australians pride themselves on trying to be fairly even-minded about these sorts of things. The outpouring of anger after Sandpaper Gate and the Prime Minister getting involved, and we were absolutely flagellating our own players, which tends not to happen in other countries. I think that the average Australian cricket fan, if you ask, like I've got a very good friend of mine, actually my cousin's husband, who old-fashioned cricket fan, just loves the sport, not so keen on T20, but watches it wherever he can. I could guarantee you, if I got him here, he would just say, it was just a disgrace. He would just say, what's the point of even holding these events if India is going to do that? And I think Indian fans need to know that is the honest opinion that the rest of the world has at the moment. And I don't think it comes from a place of jealousy. I think it just comes from a place of trying to call what is fair, what is fair. So I think the average Australian fan would say, yeah, India did deserve to win. They are the best side, but there needs to be something done so that it's not healthy for the sport if it just seems as though things are set up for India to win. And then it starts to take a life of its own as well. That anytime there's any sort of perceived advantage to India, rightly or wrongly, it just sort of adds to the whole fire. And so it almost needs to be the other way. That it needs to be scrupulously done to be seen that there isn't that extra advantage going forward if Indians care for how the rest of the world thinks. And maybe they don't. I don't know.
Yeah, I absolutely get your point, Paul. And so a long season ahead for Indians, because it's the IPL coming in the next 2 months, so it's going to be a T20 cricket carnival. But there's the WTC finals happening at Lords as well, Australia and South Africa. I'm pretty much interested about it. So what do the next 2-3 months of cricket looks like for you, Paul?
Well, it's always interesting now that the IPL kind of dominates, and it's another one that they don't do us any favors in Australia with time zones. And the average IPL match starts at midnight and finishes at 4 a.m. So the double headers, the first game of the double headers, are a lot easier. They sort of start at 8 o'clock and finish at midnight. I think that I'll certainly be trying to keep an eye on the IPL, and even if I can't, you know, I watch so much cricket late at night. Sometimes I look ahead and say, if the Australian team's not going to be involved in a while, there's a chance for me to actually live a normal life for a while. So even if I don't watch as many IPL games in full, I'll certainly be watching the mini highlights, the 17-minute highlights where, you know, every ball is either a 4 or 6 or a wicket, which is great. Beyond that, I'm very keen on the World Test Championship final. I think it's going to be a very hard game to pick. I agree that Australia start as favourites, but only by a millimetre. I think South Africa will be very difficult for Australia to beat. And then I'm really interested in the India tour of England as well. I think that one of my favourite things, I think that sort of the best cricket watching experience is Test cricket in England. I just love the aesthetics of it all. I love the red ball moving around and the atmosphere that the England fans generate. And when it's England against India or England against Australia as well, it's hard to beat. So probably looking to watch the highlights of the IPL, maybe a few games live, get in a bit of sleep, avoid getting divorced, and then when June rolls around and the England-India Test series comes again, spend plenty of nights watching from 8 o'clock till 3:30 in the morning.
Yeah, Paul. I just have one question, Paul. Still very early days now that you actually mentioned about the India tour of England, which even I am very much looking forward to it because, as you said, the whole aesthetics of playing in England, the red ball moving away. I mean, I absolutely love it when India tour Australia and England. These two are my favorite tours, which I really look forward to. So I just have one question on the England India tour of England. We saw what happened in the fifth test, the Sydney test. Rohit Sharma actually opted out of playing from that test, and it was just Preet Bumrah who was leading. Because we as Indians, we don't have this thing. We've never seen an Indian captain actually opting out from not playing a test match, dropping himself and allowing someone else to take up the captaincy. So, what do you think is the future of Rohit Sharma in Test match cricket? He's just won you the Champions Trophy, two ICC tournaments in the last 1 year, which no Indian captain has ever done. Even Mahendra Singh Dhoni could not have done something like that. So, but in Test cricket, Rohit Sharma, it's not been the best of the days for him. We lost the home series against New Zealand. We were whitewashed by them. Then we went to Australia. We were going to Australia after winning the previous two Border Gavaskar trophies in Australia, but this one didn't turn out very well for us. The only test which we won was actually under the captaincy of Jasprit Bumrah. So Rohit Sharma in Test cricket is not looking like a very good combination for the Indian team. So what do you think? Like going to the England tour, do you see Rohit Sharma still leading this side, or does Jasprit Bumrah lead the side and Rohit Sharma just is a part of the playing 11? What do you think is going to be the scenario for that?
Yeah, it's hard to know. I mean, on one level, if I was Rohit Sharma, I would retire from Test cricket because he's getting on a bit. There's plenty of white ball cricket to play. I don't think anyone would criticise that decision. And it's the hardest place probably to bat in the world. I think England. The only exception that with Bazball, they've sometimes asked for pitches to be a bit flatter. So that's a bit of a change. So. But if they're going to be traditional English pitches, then as an opening batter, there's not much more difficult than that in world cricket. So I wouldn't blame him at all for retiring. I kind of agree. I think Jasprit Bumrah does look like a better captain. It's always hard to tell from at a distance. And I always do think that the significance of the captain is overstated. It's still 11 on 11. The captain can only do so much. But I think that maybe Bumrah just seems a little bit more natural, maybe a little bit more aggressive in his field placings, and maybe that's the right thing to do. Whether Rohit would want to go across and just be as an opener, or look, if he does go to England, then I already admire him, but I would admire him even more, because I would have no criticism of if he stood down and retired. But to go there, put himself up against that red ball in those conditions as opening batter, knowing that the stakes are high and that if he fails enough, he'll be dropped, then that would be I'd have a great deal of admiration for that. My instinct is that he won't go, though, and that it will be Bumrah captain, but I've got no idea.
We'll have to wait and watch, because right now the focus is obviously on IPL, because it's a cricket carnival here, so everyone's just tuning into the IPL where friends become enemies. The friendship from Indian cricket has ended. We are now all looking forward to the IPL. But but thanks a lot, Paul, for joining, and I hope you had a great time, because this is something, a very new experience for me as well, having a chat with an Australian broadcaster, Australian podcaster. So it's very new for me, and I definitely had a great time having a chat with you, and I hope it was the same for you as well. And we'll definitely catch up sometimes later as well. We get an opportunity to be on the podcast again. But thank you, Paul, for joining, and that's it, man. Thank you. And also, guys, a huge shout out to his podcast channel, Dennett on Cricket Podcast. I will be mentioning the link of his podcast in the description, so please do check out his podcast channel, guys. It's some crazy cricket content. He is a fan just like us. For that, in fact, he's been watching cricket since many years, much more than what I am. So please do check out his podcast channel as well. And thank you, Paul, for joining, guys.
Thanks, Vignesh. It was a pleasure. I really enjoyed it.